One thing I wanted to just point out is that we do have a networking event coming up. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about it, but it is a no-nonsense networking event where we bring you together. It's virtual, so it'll be on Zoom, but this ability for you to actually meet each other and talk to each other, hear each other's elevator pitch and which agencies you're targeting, et cetera. We say it's no nonsense because we're driving towards introducing people. We're driving towards making sure you're increasing your network by 10, 50, or 100 people in this 2-hour event. So if you haven't signed up already, go ahead and sign up for that event. And you can see, by the way, across the bottom, it's govconchamber.com/networking is the URL to do that. Okay, we're ready to talk about cold calls in the federal market. Today's training is going to be how to make cold calls in the federal market. And I'm excited about cold calling because cold calling really is the start of business. If you're trying to sell, then you've got to start with cold calling. Once you start having success, you don't actually have to do as much cold calling unless you want to get into a new agency, right? You have organic growth, you have established relationships, and we'll talk more about that. But one of the things about cold calls, I get that it can be scary, right? It can be, sometimes the anxiety is there. We're worried about different things, but at least you don't have to worry about, signs that say, beware of dog. You don't have to literally beware of dogs. When I was doing sales early in my career, I was selling vacuum cleaners door to door. And I literally would have to run away from houses that had dogs, sometimes where the owner's just setting it after the mailman or the salesperson or whatever, right? It was kind of a horrible situation, and we had legitimate reasons to be scared. I think you have legitimate reasons to have anxiety, and I think we can minimize that anxiety, put the dog on a leash, so to speak. One of the things about cold calls, and the reason I like talking about this topic, is because for so many of us, it's the very last thing we do, right? Somebody will say, we need to do cold calls, and we know it. It's like, well, I'm going to research this person before I call them. And you'll spend like an hour or two researching them only to call them and find out they retired. Or, you'll reach out and do other tasks within your company. I call this constructive procrastination. You have to do cold calls, but there's the mail that just came in. Let me process that. Or somebody had a question. Oh, let me help you with that question. Somebody needs to clean the toilets in our office. Oh, I'll do that. You'll do almost anything other than making cold calls. And I think the reason is because we don't embrace how to do cold calls easily, right? I'm not saying it's, anybody can walk up and just start picking up the phone, but it can be way easier than you experience if you have a set of knowledge and skills that allow you to pick up the phone and know that the dog's not going to chase you. No one's going to sit there and hate you. They're either going to answer your call or not, right? But there's these things you can do to prep that will move forward. And I've done a lot of other training on it, and hopefully people in my team will drop that into the chat. But today I'm going to tackle it from a different angle. And I want to begin with refresher for us. What is cold calls and why is it important that we do that? Then I'm going to give you some tips for how to successfully prepare for cold calls so that you can have successful cold calls, right? Successful cold call is one that leads to where you want it to go. Sometimes we fail to be successful at cold calling. And so I want to talk about some of the reasons why. When you understand some of the reasons for why we're not having the success we want, you can then begin to put plans and take steps to overcome those challenges. And the last thing I want to talk about is cold calling is literally the first thing you do, but then you're trying to get to a meeting. So I want to give you some tips for how to have meeting success. I just had a customer this week talk about they've got a meeting on Monday and they want to prep. What should I do to prep? And there's things you can do to turn that into a successful call instead of just a great call. A successful call, a successful anything, moves the ball forward, moves the sale forward. And a great one is just one where everybody loves each other, right? So that's what we're going to dive into today in this training. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonnell. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to my federal sales training where I provide tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years in the federal market as a small business owner, and since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret, it's just a process. When we follow the process A to Z, we're going to have repeatable, predictable results. And that's what I want for you. And that's what I want for your business. Really quick, as we get started, do me a favor and tell me how much cold calling are you doing right now, right? Do you feel like you're doing a lot, a little, or none? I mean, just be candid, right? None is you're doing 2 or 3 a week is still none to me, right? So put that in, a lot, a little, or none. And just let me know. And you don't have to do it. If you feel comfortable, it's great for us to be able to see that and communicate in the chat. So let's talk about what cold calling is. Cold calling is a very proactive part of your business. There's a reactive side of your business and a proactive side. Or in here I say there's active selling and there's passive selling. I've done a lot of training on passive selling, including some this week, or I think yesterday, where I was talking about marketing assets and marketing tools that are out there. So your website, your LinkedIn profile, your dynamic small business search or DSBS profile, those are your passive marketing tools. That's passive selling. It's vital. It's necessary. It covers down on 95% of the market that's out there, but you still are going to do active selling. You want to get into a particular agency, or you want to get into a particular teaming partner to work with them. You need to do something proactive to develop those relationships and get started. And so we call that active selling. And cold calling is about as active as you can get. You're picking up the phone, you're dialing somebody you do not know, right? You haven't talked to them before. If you're lucky, you've done some tips that I've done in different training where you can go onto LinkedIn and some other places and maybe warm it up a little bit, engage with them so they know who you are. But that's not realistic for a big amount of cold calling, right? That's important for your top tier people you want to reach out. Let's say you're going to reach out to a CIO. You're at this level where a conversation to a CIO would make sense. Well, you would want to engage them for a couple of months on LinkedIn and in social media or at events, so they begin to become aware of you. That way, when you reach out to them, it's not truly a cold call. It's kind of warmed up. But you can't do that for everybody. It's just a waste of time to do it for everybody. And so some of these people, you're just trying to have a meeting with them that maybe moves forward. And so you're calling these people you don't know. And I think we all understand that, right? That's the idea of cold calling. The time we do this is generally when we're new to government contracting and or we're trying to get into a new agency or a new customer that we haven't been into before. Large primes have billions of dollars in past performance, but they still at different times have to do cold calling into a new command or into a new agency, et cetera. And so cold calling is something we do continuously, but as we move forward, it gets easier and easier because we've got a lot of past performance and other information to be able to come along. So then the last thing is cold calling is part of the 7-step process that we teach. I don't say the process step is cold calling. I call it outreach. But outreach is the first step to building a relationship. People buy from those they know, like, and trust. And so cold calling, outreach, this helps people begin to know who you are. And when you do the cold calls, you develop relationships. You start a relationship. And if the first meeting is done correctly, then you're going to have a second meeting. And that second meeting is what's leading to this relationship being developed with the people you want to build relationships with at agencies or teaming partners. And I call this wheel part of our 7-step process. I call this wheel the winning circle, right? Once you're on that circle, you're going to start winning, because when you have good relationships, you're going to hear about good opportunities, slam dunk opportunities, ones that are written for your company, or they look like they were written for your company, right? And when you have those type of slam dunk opportunities, it makes it so much easier to write winning proposals so that you can start landing contracts, getting sales success. And that all happens from you picking up the phone here, getting onto that wheel, right? There's a couple steps before, and we'll talk about it. But outreach and cold calling, that's the beginning of being on the wheel of success and building those relationships that you know are necessary. So let's go through talking about how you can have more success in cold calling, what you can do to control this. I teach people that you need to take responsibility in order to gain control. And responsibility is never about blame. It's just saying, what can I do? Because if I know what I can do, then I can control it getting done. But if I know what you can do, I can't control whether you do it or not. I can just control whether I can tell you what to do, but it doesn't change anything. And so I look at my success. I look at your success as us knowing what we can do. So the first thing is, let's just assume your cold calling efforts are happening because you're trying to get into an agency, right? So the first thing you want to do on cold calling is pick one agency. I see people sometimes do cold calling across many agencies. And the problem with this is you don't get any depth into that agency, and you get a call here and a call there. What you want when you do cold calling exercises, I'm okay with you going after multiple agencies if that's your plan. Just do it in different weeks or months. Go heads down on one agency. So pick one agency, let's say the Army, right? I want to get into the Army. How am I going to get into the Army? When you do that, it allows you to be able to build on all the successes. Let me just turn off this little scroll bar here. When you do this, it allows you to build on your successes of meeting people and having relationships. And so if you meet one person at the Army, they might introduce you to another, or you might know two others you're trying to meet. Hey, John, do you know Jane and Sally? Oh, yeah, I do. You mind if I tell them that you said to call them, or would you make an intro? Now you have two people you were going to call, but maybe John can introduce you. That can happen in one agency. But if you're calling Department of Education, Department of Army, and HHS or something, well, these people aren't going to know each other. So that's really important to pick one agency. The second step on how to have a lot more success in cold calling. Remember, cold calling is this outreach, is to create a target list. The second step in that 7-step process, let me back up for a second. First thing you're doing is research. You're understanding that target agency. You're gathering details, all the details you can, org charts, strategic plans. I did a topic, or I mentioned yesterday that you can look in the budget, and the budget can allow you to see information about the organizational structure and how they're spending. But when you do that research, you start targeting, and targeting is that second step of the 7-step process. And here we say number 2, right? Create a target list of 200 people. 200 is like the opening. That's the minimum you want. I can build a 200 person list really fast. Like in a single day, I can build that list. It'll take me a little longer to get names and emails to every one of them, but you can build a list pretty fast going in. Whether I'm trying to target contracting officers, so KO or CO, that stands for contracting officer. If you don't know this, in the military, we call a CO a commanding officer, so we reversed it and put KO. But basically, you could be calling contracting officers or building a target list of contracting officers, small business professionals, or program office personnel. These people are part of the acquisition process. This is the people you want to talk to. They either have the need, or they have the money, or they sign the contracts, right? And these are all people you're going to target and do cold calling. Hey, I'd like to reach out and introduce myself. And so create that target list of 200 people. When I do that on a particular agency, I target government employees. I target small business, industry partners, so small and large businesses. I'll look at that one agency, the Army, for example, and I might go in and go, well, let me see who's winning over there in my space. So let's say I'm doing IT, who's winning in my space, who are small businesses and who are large businesses. Let me reach out to some of those larges. Let me reach out to some of those smalls. By the way, don't reach out to larges unless you've got some past performance, right? It's just a waste of your time. Reach out to the smalls because they're all the way up to 20, 50 million. They'll still be willing to take a call because they remember what it was like to be a small business. But reach out to them. No, not dissing larges, just larges have more criteria. But reach out to, you're building this list of industry partners. And so I would build a list of, let's say, 50 small businesses and 50 large, these are people's names, right? So in a small business, you're not going to have a lot of names, one name per company, pretty much, the owner, if you're lucky. And in a large business, you might have 10 or 20 or 30 from one particular group. So if I said the Army and I'm doing IT, I might think about Leidos or Booz Allen or Accenture or somebody, right? And so I would look in there and go, well, let me find 10 or 20 people from each one of those top 3 larges and pursue them. And so those are the type of people I'm putting into my target list. It's very easy, really, once you start getting good at this, right, and getting used to doing this skill, it's very easy or very quick to build a list of 200 people. Easy, less so, right? It takes a little talent to have that and a little art, I think. But number 3, you want to make sure this target list has name, number, and email, because when you start doing cold calls and you start doing outreach, you don't want to spend time stopping and doing a different task like finding more people. You want to have so many people there that when you start picking up the phone, you've got at least a couple of weeks of traction, because you're going to call all 200 people and then you're going to come back and call them again. You're not going to just call them and move on to the next 200, right? You're going to call them until they say yes or no, or you give up, right? And you have to decide that if they were on your list in the first place, you probably should not give up. And I'll probably talk more about this in a minute, but you should probably not give up for 1, 2, 3 months. And people are like, why not? It's like, well, if you really want to sell in there, don't give up. Just keep pushing in. And, and I have people who want to work with me and I feel horrible that I haven't got back to them, right? So I'm not ignoring their email. Well, I am, but I'm ignoring it because I got another priority and I'm juggling my priorities, but I want to talk to them. So if they're persistent, somebody just reached out to me today and said, hey, I just want to make sure I want to talk to you about working together. And I'm like, well, you're at the top of my list now because you're following back up. And that's what I want to teach you in cold calling. When you have a list of 200 people and you start following through and you be persistent, you'll start finding traction. But you can't expect anybody to answer your email, your phone call in the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, especially in the government space, because they tend to be busy. In the industry side, ironically, number 2 there, you'll find they answer much quicker. Okay, so how to cold call more successfully? You're picking an agency, you're creating that target list of 200 people, and then I want you to have a template and script in place. I didn't put template here, but you want to have an email template so you can follow up. And I always suggest, and I have a whole separate training on how do you actually do the cold call? How do you pick up the phone? What are the steps in there? And so go look at my previous training, just type in cold call and you'll see it come up. but use a voicemail script. Every single time you call one of these 200 people, you're going to leave the same script. You're calling to set up a meeting. This is the important thing I want you to remember about cold calling. You are not calling to have a meeting. When you pick up the phone and call somebody, you're going to catch them completely off guard. Unless you did the opposite of what I said, which is research somebody before you call them, you're not actually going to know a lot about them. That's by design. That's on purpose, because I don't want you wasting time researching a person you're going to call only to find out you never reached them, right? It's so much better to call them, schedule a meeting for a week or 2 weeks out, and then now you research them. Now you take the time to get to know them. Plus, when you call them, they don't know you from Adam, and they can't remember all of their business off the top of their cuff. So off the top of their head. When you call these people, they're going to be picking up the phone on the fly. You do not want them to talk to you about their agency or their business or whatever. Schedule a little bit farther out. Send them an email saying, hey, here's what we're going to talk about. So that way they can do a little prep. They're not going to prepare as much as you did probably, but at least they can sit there and say, oh, they're going to come in and ask me about data analytics in the Army. Let me go look a couple of things. They're going to ask me about an opportunity or about this thing. Let me go refresh my memory on it. And so the idea of a voicemail script and an opening script are designed to lead you towards scheduling a meeting. I'm calling today to schedule a meeting, right? I'm not prepared to have the meeting today. I really want to make sure I am prepared to get the best use of your time. How about next week? Can we schedule a time Tuesday or Thursday at 1 or 2 p.m. or something, right? And so as you move forward and you want to have success in cold calling, remember some of these tips I gave you here. And again, I have a lot more tips. You can go into detail on previous training. But the biggest thing to remember about cold calling, picking up the phone and dialing somebody for the first time, the biggest thing to remember is that you're not having a meeting, you're scheduling a meeting. When you remember that, the pressure comes down on you and the other person, and it becomes such an much easier call to have. Okay, so let's talk about why cold calls sometimes don't have the success that you want. So I just put some reasons here. And again, I started these sentences these bullets with your. And the reason I did that is because we are taking responsibility for our success or not success, right? So I don't want to put it on the people we're calling when we do cold calls. I want to put it on us because then we can put corrective action around each one of these. So an example is the first bullet. You're calling the wrong people, right? It might be you did your research and targeting and you're reaching out to the wrong people. First off, they might be retired. They might have switched jobs. You might be reaching out to somebody you think is a core. Like here's a classic example of the wrong people. Inside of some forecast that agencies put out, they'll put somebody's name down and say, oh, this is the point of contact. But if any of you have ever done this before, we often call those people and like, what the heck's my name doing there? What am I doing? That's the point of contact. So what I mean by wrong person is a person who we think is in a particular role, but really is not. And that's fine. That happens. This is why you want a lot of people. And I'll talk about this in a minute, how to enjoy. The way you get past that is just to accept some of those people will be the wrong people. The second bullet, right? You're just reaching them at the wrong time or a bad time. This is vital for you to remember. These people you're calling are no different than you. Have you ever been late to work? Have you ever rushed to work? Sick, but you still had to go to work. Pressured because your mom is sick and you're trying to take care of her. You got kids and they're sick. I don't know why everybody's sick in my scenario, but you're going golfing, whatever it is, right? Have you ever had a situation, the end of the year spending, or the government might shut down, right? All these potential bad times. We might not be having success, not for any other reason except for when we called them, it was a bad time for them to receive it. And I've been in that position on both sides, obviously doing the calls, but sometimes people call me and I'm like, I can't get my head around that because I got to prepare for the live that I'm doing at noon or something, right? And so when you do that, when you seek first to understand that other people might be in a tough situation, then you can begin to realize, okay, I'm just going to follow back up. The key thing to remember about reaching people at a bad time is if they don't tell you no, then just assume it's a bad time for them. Here's an analogy. When I used to drive heavily in DC and the traffic, 2-hour commutes minimum a day, you always run into people who are driving in a way that you're like, you're killing me. But somewhere along the lines, I switched over and I said, I am going to have an assumption that every time somebody does something that I might feel as a disservice to me as a driver or disrespect to me as a driver, I'm going to go, they must have a personal emergency that they need to get there. I'm going to back away and get out of their way. If you come at cold calling that same way, when you're calling somebody, if they're just kind of blowing you up, they're not saying no, or they're not getting back to you, Don't read anything into it other than, wow, they must be really busy. I'll just give them a little space and I'll follow back up in a couple of days. Number three, right? You're not calling enough people. And this is what really is the biggest problem we have with not having success. You should be calling a minimum of 10 people a day. And when you do that, that's 50 people a week times 50 weeks. That's a lot of people. What is that? 2,500 or something? Somebody did the math, but you can do the math. But if you're full-time sales, you should be calling 25 people a day. That's not hard if you're full-time business development or you're full-time growing your company. But if you just commit to 10 a day, you will find you're calling a lot more people than you are today. And this is something I'd be really curious about. It's like, how many people are you calling every single day? Are you calling one person a day, 5 people a day, more than 10? Throw it in the chat if you're feeling generous. You're not following up enough. I get this a lot where people will do cold calls. They might call once or twice and they'll give up. They're like, oh, they're not getting back to me. Again, go back to number 2. Maybe it's a bad time. It's a bad time because of something big, or it's a bad time because they're just busy. Just keep following up. I say you should be following up 30 to 40 times minimum before you go, you know what? Maybe they don't want to talk to me, or maybe they're not ever going to receive my emails. Maybe my emails and phone calls are going into spam. 40 times it's acceptable to give up. If you haven't called somebody 40 times and emailed and softly, hey, I'm just bringing something back to the top of the inbox. If you haven't done that, then maybe we're not following up enough, right? And this 5th bullet here, you're not getting enough experience. And so what I mean by this is when you start doing more calls, a lot more calls, you start having the chance to leave those voicemails, leave those messages, have the conversation to drive towards a meeting. You have numerous experiences where they kind of sidetrack you from trying to schedule a meeting. That's called experience. When you have many, many calls under your belt, you'll get used to somebody saying, well, why don't we just talk now? Oh, I would love to, except for I got another commitment. And your commitment, as far as I'm concerned, could be the movies. You just say, I have another commitment, and it cuts people off. There's ways to manage that. Well, experience will help you have more calls. And so if you do enough calls and you start reaching enough people, you will start having more experience that allows you to have more success in the first time you're reaching people. I really want you to pay attention to this bell curve. It's vital that you understand this bell curve is 100%, right? Let's say it's 100 people. Innovators are people, when you call them, they're going to say, oh my God, let's talk. Early adopters are going to say, oh my God, let's schedule a meeting, right? Early majority people, 34% of the people are going to go, well, who do you know? Why should I talk to you? They're talking to you a little bit, but they're not immediate yeses, right? And then late majority and laggards are 50%. They're not going to talk to you. I don't need to go into the details on why. But this is vital to understand that only 16%, those 2, are going to even answer you, right? Or have a meeting with you. So here's how the numbers work. If you call 100 people, only 16% of them are going to answer or get back to you, right? You might get lucky with a little bit more, but then you need to reach 100 of those to get the 16% who are scheduling the meeting and then having relationships. You are not going to have strategic relationships with 8 strategic partners, for example, by calling 8 people or 18 or 28 people, right? You need to call a couple of 100 people to get in. That's sales. And the people who are not successful are not willing to put the effort in, but the people who put the effort in will find that results. Somebody once said that, oh, your business is successful because you're lucky. Yeah, 10, 20 years of luck. Right? I've been that 20 years of working hard on something, and all of a sudden something happens. That's what experience pops in. I don't have enough time to go into this first meeting, so I have a whole nother training. Somebody will put it in the chat, or you can find it. But basically, I want to really drive in this point that says, if you want to have success in your first meeting, once you schedule a meeting through that cold call, make sure you research your agency, because you're going to demonstrate that you care, and it shifts authority in your favor. They look better at you. Use a call plan sheet. I have an entire separate training on how to prepare a call plan, but the call plan makes the meeting easy to flow. It makes it easy for them to understand, makes it easy for you to control so that it leads towards the success that you want. And then the last tip for here is prepare questions that are going to drive, that's funny, prepare questions that'll drive discussion. Apologize for that. You want the customer to talk to you about their agency, about what's going on. You want industry partners to talk about opportunities they're pursuing. And so you want to prepare on a call plan a set of questions, 5, 10 questions that enable you to have an easy flow of the dialogue in a meeting you have. When you do that, you're going to have successful meetings. Here's what I want you to remember from today's training. First off, remember, don't take it personally, right? It's probably something else. They have some sort of urgent thing going on, but they'll get back. Unless the answer is no, It's yes or maybe, right? The second thing I want you to remember is that success probably requires 100 times more activity than you're doing right now. And what I mean by 100 times is if you're calling, 5, 10 people a week, really 10x that, 100x that, start calling 100 people a week. That is a lot of people when you haven't been calling folks before, but it's only 20 phone calls. And most of those phone calls aren't going to answer, right? So you leave a voicemail, then an email, and then you get a meeting. There's activity you can do. Here's the task I want you to take away from today's training. Pick a target agency and build a list, a target list of 200 people. You could start with building a target list of 25 or 50 people, but I have whole trainings on how do you build it. If you're in the sustaining membership, you can go in. I have a whole course on how to do this and how to find all those names and numbers. So if you find value in the training and you want to get access to that course, consider becoming a sustaining member. We'd love to have you help us. For everybody, remember, government contracting, it's not a secret. It's just a process. Part of the process is having a good weekend. I hope you do. I've got 10 trainings lined up on my whiteboard for the next 2 weeks. So make sure you come back and check those out as you go forward. I will talk to you soon.